real honest chances Snowden gets pardoned, they won't allow it, right?
If Trump is serious about, Trump has always said, he even said this at Liberty University, no less, which is a very, conservative Christian school. He said, never forget to pay back your enemies. And if he's serious about that, if he wants to deal a real response to deep state politics and power, then he will pardon Snowden and Assange. Here's what I think is going on. I think both the Durham investigation and the Trump's talks about pardoning Snowden are an attempt to create a détente with the deep state actors who tried to take him out in 2016 and 2017 and 2018 and 2019, that they should back off and not interfere in the 2020 election. Or if they do and he loses, he'll start pardoning everybody they hate. So, and Durham will escalate and bring more indictments against more people. So that, is a good segue into really all of this both gives context to the Flynn case and context to the Millie Weaver case, the context to the Kleinsmith Spygate case, and broader context even to the Hillary Clinton case to a certain degree, which is that is the sort of backstory. So the backstory of how intelligence operators operate. If you want to understand American politics and how it operated, and this used as a template by international operators post-1970s, is the American Tabloid trilogy by James Ellroy. So the first book is American Tabloid, the second is The Cold 6000, and the third is Blood's a Rover. He always said these were history books, that if there was an honest librarian, they would put his fiction tales in the history section. He does a great job of giving a template for how American power operates. It also actually is good context. The Last Narc that we talked about last show is good context for this. The Felix Rodriguez's of the world, the Frank Sturgis's of the world. People want to Google Frank Sturgis, then they'll understand what I'm talking about. Just look at the peculiar places this man manages to show up, from supposedly being with Fidel Castro. Well, he was with Fidel Castro in the hills in Cuba in 1958 to being one of the arrestees at Watergate. How does that happen exactly? So the key is that the international operations of the spy, national security state, whatever you want to call it, deep state, anything else, effectively integrated a lot of outside operators and outside contractors, the industrial military complex that Eisenhower talked about in his exit speech in 1961, his farewell speech. And what it is just institutionalized intelligence apparatus in the United States. And because of the disclosures of MK Ultra, by the first famous burglary and disclosure of documents, of course, was to some degree, it was the Pentagon Papers being leaked. The second one was the robbery that took place in Media, Pennsylvania, by a small group of people who figured out that small FBI office was not really well protected, burglarized it, and they're the ones who first disclosed COINTELPRO. That later led to the uncovering of the other issues that were pertinent in terms of MK Ultra and other illicit activities by the FBI on domestic spying and surveillance in the United States. All of that led to the Church Committee hearings, which led to the exposure of a bunch of corrupt officers within the broader national security state, including at the CIA and other places, including the prosecution of Mark Felt, who was a Hoover director of COINTELPRO, who was the secret source for destroying Nixon. Deep Throat was actually one of the most corrupt agents in the history of federal law enforcement, who wasn't doing it to clean up government, but to protect the most corrupt aspects of it. And they were cleared out by Carter in large part. Many of them end up showing up in the Iran hostage issues in 1979, 1980, and will show up in other contexts. But what happens is our intelligence infrastructure started to outsource. So they started, and that's what Millie Weaver's film was about. That was about to be released when she was suddenly arrested, she and her husband, on Friday. They were going to release this week a documentary called, I believe it's called Shadowgate. It's up, currently still available on YouTube. We'll see how long that lasts. It's up on band.video as well. It will stay there forever. And basically what it just details is this overlap between outside contractors and the national security state, and how it is compromising intelligence and creating a deep state that has power outside of the institutional roles of government. If you want to see a good TV show that sort of covers this in live time, It's a show called Deep State. It was either on FX. I think it was on FX. Maybe Epix. May have been Epix. But it was actually pretty good. I think it went through 2 seasons, maybe 3. But it just documents this overlap between the outside contractor world and the national security state at the highest levels. And that's who was called upon to go after Trump in 2016. So it wasn't the Defense Department internally. It was outside contractors being paid by the Defense Department, people like Stefan Halper, who are longtime operatives, who are often located in think tanks, foundations, university professors, sometimes within the media. You can study Operation Mockingbird for how that was done at full scale. It partially portrayed another great movie called Spy Game, where one of the Hong Kong reporters is really on the UK spy payroll, and that helps facilitate certain things that takes place. And so all of that, the backstory is you've had outside contractors have had extraordinary access to a bunch of government secrets. So that's part one of what's been happening is sort of backstory. The other second part of what's been happening is backstory is the centralization and digitization of information. So, back in 1971, they had to actually break into an FBI office in Media, Pennsylvania to get the files because there were only hard copies. When Hoover died, when they looked for his files, almost all of them had disappeared in ways that nobody has yet been able to understand, all of his internal blackmail files. But now the digitization of record transforms that entirely, and particularly with the information gathering expanding dramatically. So not only does the NSA, here's one of my little favorite trivia questions I like to ask people: did Ed Snowden receive a W-2 from the government at the time he went whistleblower? The answer is no. He was working for an outside contractor. How did an outside contractor have that much access to every single piece of intel about every single American? That gives you the scope and scale of what's been taking place. Not only are records accessible now electronically, which changes who can access them, changes how easily they can be accessed. It also, the scope and scale of what's being gathered is unprecedented. This was combined with Obama digitizing medical records under the Obamacare Act, which the IRS was using as a pretext to gather medical records on every single American. The blackmail, I was involved in that because I brought the biggest Bivens class action in American history against the IRS after they seized 60 million medical records of 10 million Americans, including prominent federal judges, including almost every Major League Baseball player, almost every member of the Screen Actors Guild, the Directors Guild in Hollywood, major press participants. They knew, who went to what kind of sex therapy, who went to what kind of drug therapy, who was on illicit drugs of different types. I called it J. Edgar Hoover's wet dream of a blackmail file. They were gathering that in mass, and my client blew the whistle on it through our suit, which prevented it from going further. But that gives you an idea of what they want. So in that context, Millie Weaver's making a film about how this whole shadow world of outside contractors have incredible access to blackmail files based on their ability to be part of this extended deep state operation that's now not only national, but international in scope. Then at the same time, you have Flynn, who's sort of a critic of the certain aspects of this, of the national security establishment, who wants to purify it from its rogue actors who they needed to take out. And to give you an example of this, the outside contractor for the Defense Department helping to set up Carter Page is Stefan Halper. Stefan Halper came out this week, actually told people 3 days before any Flynn story broke that Flynn was going to be taken out. So that gives you an idea of the overlap of what's happening here. And if you read a James Ellroy novel, while that's in the domestic context, you'll understand how it applies now in the international spy context. Then you add to that movies like Taylor of Panama, Our Man in Havana, and you get a bigger context of spies often just make stuff up. They're illicitly connected to enrich themselves often. They cash out in the private sector. Just track where high-ranking national security establishment people go. Where does a John Poindexter end up? Where does a James Comey end up back when he left the first time? How does it overlap with cases that Mueller's handling at the same time? Where does John Brennan leave? Which company? And it's always companies that sound like CIA front companies, like the Analysis Corporation. I always tell people, if you want to hide assets, or if you want to deal with asset protection in general, if you want to watch how the CIA does it, it's always the worldwide imports It's always some generic name there's 600 versions of, so you can never track and trace who's doing what where. So all of those, so that's the sort of broader context of what's going on. And then you put into another context, the origin of the CIA and the itself, which is that the CIA was really created to defend a certain class interest, and that they disguised as America's interest. But the CIA was original predecessor of that was the OSS, Office of Strategic Services. They were formed by, when I was at Yale, I wrote an article about them because there's 2 statutes to Nathan Hale in America. One of them sits at the center of Yale's old campus. The other one sits at the center of the CIA campus. It was 3 guys at Yale who helped form the foundation of the OSS, the CIA, and the State Department's intelligence apparatus. Particularly the Dulles brothers were heavily influential in this. And they believed that what was good for GM was good for America. What was good for the United Fruit Company was somehow what's good for America. What's good for gold miners is what's good for America in South Africa. What's good for diamond miners is what's good for America in the Congo. And a lot of their policies and politics that were supposedly about American interest and anti-communism were almost always about protecting an elite class's interest. And almost all the CIA recruits from Harvard and Yale and the Ivy League. It's not a coincidence you keep seeing these young kids pop up from the Ivy League. The lead whistleblower in the Ukraine case, a young Yale graduate. A key person that's involved in giving info to Steele was a young kid working at the Brookings Institution. Stephen Halper is an old professor. They all intersect, who often teaches at Oxford. So in Cambridge. So that's where a lot of these, it's really an elite class protecting itself. That's how they see it. That's how they see themselves. And they use the Hoover tactics of the 60s and 70s in the modern era to gather information and protect their self-interest. So to them, Trump was a direct threat against their self-interest. And in leading into the Kleinsmith indictment, the problem was, how are they going to be able to use their outside contractors, share information selectively internally that you could never do if it was a criminal grand jury investigation, yet at the same time have all the power of a warrant? Well, you call it a counterintelligence investigation, and in order to share information that you otherwise couldn't if it was a grand jury investigation, and you use FISA. And so you say it's a Foreign Agents Registration Act violation rather than a grand jury investigation. So you can circumvent all of the controls the judiciary has, the legislative branches have on this process going AWOL. Now, so that's part of what's going on. The second part of what's going on is they had to make up a story. Their problem was anybody who knew anything about Trump knew the idea of the Russian blackmail story was just absurd. The story was ludicrous on its face. So if you're Chris Steele, you're just Taylor of Panama, you're our man in Steele, you just find all the rumors and innuendo you can over conversations at bars with people who have no connection to anybody, who've just heard rumors and innuendo. The crazier you make it, the more believable it is to the people that are paying you and wanting to propagate it. And that's how you launder intel and information there. You create bogus sources. You claim you're a secret spook that has all these connections when you don't. That's step one. But within the government, they need to be able to tell a story to get access to FISA. And the key was, how do they do that? They had nobody connected to Trump that would legitimate an extended FISA warrant. So what they do is they look at, Trump does a interview with the Washington Post, and the Washington Post demands to know who his foreign policy advisors are. Truth is, Trump's just going on his own instinct. But so the campaign just comes up with a list of anybody who's ever sent him a letter. And included in there is Carter Page and George Papadopoulos. So they do a long scale, basically entrapment campaign against Papadopoulos, but that takes time. So they try to set him up in multiple locations, in multiple honey traps, multiple bogus meetings. They misrepresent what he said, all of that. Then the second thing they do parallel there too is try to get a FISA on Carter Page. Their problem is Carter Page is an honors graduate of Navy and has been a source for the CIA going all the way back to the mid-2000s, because he ended up in Russia for doing economic energy development out of the UK. And so he was one of the few people that the Russians would often approach, and he became a CIA source. And he would meet with Russians he had no interest in meeting with, solely because the CIA wanted him to do it. They did the same thing to General Flynn. Flynn went over to a dinner in Moscow where Putin was at the table. He only went because the Defense Department asked him to do it, and he was going to come back and report intel on what he could find. So and Putin likely knew that, didn't care, but he was trying to pitch a détente with the U.S. on the United Ally of Radical Islamic Terrorism, which is a major problem in Russia as well. So and not have a repeat of Libya. So that's what's happening. How do they make that look bad? Well, just as they lie about Flynn actually reporting to the Defense Department and try to make that look bad, and the media's lied about that now for years. Oh, look, he's over with Putin at a secret dinner. No, he wasn't. That's not what happened. But the other part is they had to lie about Page, because how do you get a FISA warrant? You're like, oh, this Carter Page guy, he keeps meeting with secret Russian agents all the time, going back a decade, right? How do you make it sound that way when, in fact, he's doing it at your government's behalf? You lie about the fact that it's at your government's behalf.
So this is interesting. Now, this is coming back to the one thing that I didn't fully understand is in the, the news is reporting that, or the big issue was that they reported that Carter Page was not a source. This was in the application for the FISA warrant, correct?
Exactly. So what happens is they lie about it in every FISA warrant. Finally, somebody in the process realizes we need some CYA. This is after Trump has won in 2017. So they're like, get the CIA to send us an email saying he wasn't a source. By the way, I have no doubt that everybody high up knew he was a source. So Kleinsmith is the fall guy. They tell Kleinsmith, hey, make sure you get that confirmation for us. Wink, wink, nod, nod. Kleinsmith says, oh, okay. But of course, the CIA isn't playing ball anymore because Brennan's gone. CIA responds, and also Carter Page has been a very useful source.
One interruption. Kleinsmith is, he's a lawyer, but what's his official function in government?
So what I call the deep state are people that are in high-ranking positions in the National Security Division of the Department of Justice, the Counterintelligence Division at the FBI, the intelligence attached to the State Department and the Defense Department, and in the CIA, and certain people in NSA. But the people in NSA often are not involved in the same way. That's handled in a different manner. They're mostly data gatherers more than they are sharers. They let the third-party operatives do the outside contractors do a lot of the illegal spying work. And so they can have plausible deniability on the NSA side. The other guy to talk to on this, of course, is always William Binney, who has great, fantastic, the true original NSA whistleblower. But Page made clear to a range of people once there were inquiries that, yes, of course, he'd been a CIA source, and that they knew. Now, he didn't want that published at the time. Now it's published to the world, because that was, so much for doing any future business in Russia when that's now a known public fact. And so that's why they put him in a bind, right? So this is why initially, even when these smear stories are coming out, he can't really respond publicly. He can't say, "Oh yeah, no, I've been an informant against the Russians for years," right? He can't say that. So that's why they knew they had him in a double bind. So, but within these apparatus, one of the key, so you're looking at people that have that label next to them: national security at the Justice Department, counterintelligence at FBI, or certain intelligence assignments at the Department of Defense, or the National Security Agency or the CIA. So Kleinsmith was the deputy general counsel for the National Security Division under the Justice Department, often working together with people at the FBI. And so almost any FISA warrant would go through someone like him. And so, but he was of the group on that list, he's beneath Yates. He's beneath, definitely beneath Clapper and Brennan in terms of their independent roles on that side of the equation. But within even the Justice Department hierarchy, he's beneath Yates. He's beneath Rosenstein. He's beneath Bente. He's beneath Comey. He's beneath McCabe. You could say he's kind of beneath Strozik, and Priestap and Lisa Page, and James Baker, general counsel of the FBI, as well. So, but he's high up relative to the rest of the world. He's low up relevant to that group of co-conspirators. But Kleinsmith is the supervisory special agent who they haven't identified yet, but I can't believe that this wasn't coming from Strozik. Is basically saying, hey, Kleinsmith, we need this third request for an extension of FISA. This is the third time they were spying on Trump even during the campaign. While he was president. Is it the third request or the third renewal? Third renewal. Okay. So the key is for FISA warrants, for people to know, Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act and the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court were created to stop spying on U.S. citizens, to give you an idea. So they only come about in the late 1970s. The Frank Church was the first United States senator known to be spied on by the National Security Agency. In 1974, a reformist Congress comes into power because of Watergate. And consequent to that, they form the Foreign Intelligence Church, creates its own special select committee on intelligence, which sadly became a permanent committee owned by the intelligence community. But at the time, it was Church exposes assassination plots, COINTELPRO, MK Ultra. Only reason we have any hearings on any of this is because of Frank Church and because he was still ticked. He was, I think, a Democrat from Idaho back when they had Democrats from Idaho. Who was still mad about getting spied on by the NSA. And so when he got power, he was like, I'm going to have a little fun. And he did. And from it, they created law. They discovered that they were using the guise of spying on foreigners to actually spy illegally on Americans. So he said, we need to stop this. So they created the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, special appointed court by the Supreme Court Chief Justice, now Justice Roberts. And the whole point was stop spying on U.S. citizens. You have to get judicial approval before you do any kind of spying like that that touches on U.S. citizens. You have to meet a very high threshold. People may remember back when it was originally came out that these warrants existed, they said, well, that means that it has to be true because these warrants meet every high-ranking official has to sign off on their authenticity. And now we know they all signed off on false affidavits.
On crap. And now, and so just to understand, like the one thing, first of all, Kleinfeld, so he's high up.
Kleinsmith.
Kleinsmith is the lawyer from Carlito's Way. Kleinsmith, he's a young lawyer. Is it I don't want to say like use the terms like a fall guy. Is this just a young schnook who knows what he has to do because he knows what people want, and so they're going for the third renewal, and they have to make these meetings between Carter Page and Russians look more suspicious, so they scrub the fact that he was a what's the word I'm looking for? Not an asset. What's the word I'm looking for?
A source.
A source, sorry. So they scrub the fact that he was a source to make it look like he had no legitimate reason to be meeting with his Russians so they could get a FISA warrant.
Yeah, so I would say two aspects with it. One is they've been lying about this all the way through. The difference is they had not even made the attempt to sort of paper the file. So when they did warrant request number 1, warrant request number 2, they're lying about Carter Page. The way FISA works for everybody to understand, the Sally Yates tried to lie about this. Just a reminder, Sally Yates is corrupt, eternal truth. Right there should be Genesis 1. Genesis 1 should be added, so they add a verse to it. But what they did is in order to get a FISA warrant, you have to meet a very high standard that someone's illicitly spying on the United States, effectively, if they're a United States citizen. Secondly, the warrant has limits of time, usually 90 days. Because they don't want, again, they're worried about abuse of authority on this. The next part of it is now, here's the power of a FISA warrant that's very unique. Not only is it outside of traditional judicial controls and protocols, but in addition to that, and separate from that, and doesn't have the same degree of legislative and traditional judicial oversight that would be present, but it allows what's called a 2-hop rule. And what it allows you to do, and it allows you to go back in time. Your typical warrant is, I get a wiretap for future communications. Not a FISA warrant. A FISA warrant allows them to look 6 months back and look at all of your communications going backwards from the date of the warrant, not just going forwards for a 90-day time frame. The second thing it allows you to do is what the 2-hop rule, which is, let's say I want to spy on Hillary Clinton. Well, I know I won't get a FISA warrant on Hillary Clinton. So I look at maybe John Podesta, campaign chief of staff, but I know Podesta, too high profile, it's a problem too. So instead, I choose Sidney Blumenthal. Because Sidney Blumenthal communicates with Podesta, communicates with Hillary, a FISA warrant on Sidney Blumenthal allows me to look at all of the emails and track records of Hillary Clinton. That's what a 2-hop rule does. So that's the incredible power of a FISA warrant. And they were not interested in Carter Page. They had zero interest in Carter Page. The whole goal was a Carter Page FISA warrant allowed them to spy on the entire Trump team because Page had been in contact with them at least within 2 hops of everybody on that team. It also allowed them to go back. So when Sally Yates was like, Carter Page wasn't part of the campaign anymore, that was such an obvious lie that if Lindsey Graham had any form of spine, he would have followed up on himself. Ted Cruz, to his credit, did. But Graham tried to exculpate her. So going back to Kleinsmith Kleinsmith is high. Now, Kleinsmith is a political activist. His own, just a reminder to all the would-be criminals out there, always in writing, never in cash. I mean, never in writing, always in cash. Never in writing, always in cash. The apparent rule, but these dimwits, Strozik, Lisa Page, and now Kleinsmith, is that he was dumb enough to text on his FBI phone. And this is deeply ironic. The guy doing a FISA warrant because to get other people's texts, knows how incriminatory they can be, is busy texting things like "Viva la Resistance." Right after Trump won, he said, "I'm so depressed. My name is all over the Trump paperwork." So, by the way, there's a giveaway that was a Trump investigation, not anything else. So Kleinsmith is part of the young professional class, and there's been a class political change in America since I kind of blame it on the West Wing show, but the whole political class in DC, I was there as a kid watching it happen, 18, 19 years old, working as a summer intern in Washington, DC, freshman year after Yale. And I saw, and West Wing had started to become popular around the TV show, and it popularized being part of the political class, being an advisor to the president, being an advisor to a congressperson, being an advisor to the Senate. So rather than these being old school political prototypes who came often from blue collar or middle class communities who were part of the administrative apparatus in Washington, increasingly it became the credentialed class that monopolized those jobs. And so the professional class as a class has strong cultural and political biases. They have incredible influence in Hollywood and media and universities and all of our culture shaping institutions. But they also almost dominate all the professional political consultants and almost everybody who works in DC. So the professional class hated Trump. And this guy was a member of that professional class that hated Trump. So he personally hated Trump, wanted to see Trump beat. So he was personally motivated. He was a happy co-complicit party in this co-conspiracy, but there's almost no chance he would have the guts to do this on his own. The idea that he by himself manufactured this, and dimwit Andrew Weissman, that hopelessly corrupt prosecutor who's now finally outside of the Department of Justice, has been tweeting away about how Kleinsmith clearly wouldn't have done this on his own. He somehow thinks it's a defense for Kleinsmith. And what he's not realizing is, I agree with Weissman, Kleinsmith didn't do this on his own. Someone instructed him to do it with a wink and a nod. What somebody wanted was create a bogus paper trail so I look good. And that's what Kleinsmith did.
I'd say it's an amazing, it's something I've said before, like the corruption, never in writing, always in cash, but oftentimes it's part of a desired outcome. They know what they want. Nobody needs to tell them what to do. It's understood, or you say, in the subtleties, that what needs to occur. So my understanding now, it's totally amazing. Some people are saying I look dumbfounded. It's just, it's putting pieces together. The two-step process, they're only going after Page through a FISA warrant, so they can go 6 months back on all of his texts and correspondence, indirectly survey those who they could never get warrants to survey in the first place. And the way to justify the third renewal is make Carter Page look more suspicious than he actually is.
I think what happened there is they'd always been making him look like he was a Russian spy going back. They got nervous in this middle of 2017 because they knew they needed to paper the file. Mueller was investigation. By the way, Kleinsmith is involved in the Hillary Clinton email investigation cover-up and the Mueller investigation and the Russiagate components. So, that gives you an idea for how a small group of people could manipulate all of this.
No, I forgot. I'm still shocked about how it's the same freaking judges coming up in all these decisions, and they're all sleeping with each other, proverbially speaking. It's a small incestuous world that sets the precedent for the rest of us.
And then they're defending their class interest, their professional class, elite class interest that President Trump threatened in ways that no presidential candidate ever had. But what's happening is summer of 2017, things are starting to break differently. So they start to become concerned that they need a better, it wasn't that they were enhancing Carter Page's risk, is that they needed to paper the file so that all the false statements they've been making about Carter Page looked better than they were. So I think what happens is somebody high up says, okay, we need something on here, like a document from the CIA that says he was not a source, that even though we never asked him for that intel, likely because we knew otherwise back in 2016, we now need some bogus cover story. And their problem was Brennan was no longer in control of the CIA, so they no longer had the cover story from the CIA. What Kleinsmith was supposed to do was get a CIA person to lie to them and create that fake paper trail. Instead, of course, the CIA didn't do that. And so then Kleinsmith was stuck, and he's like, okay, what am I going to do? I'm going to have to fake the email. And if I just fake the email, then we'll have a paper file so that the higher ups, if anybody looks at the file, they can say, no, look, we had every basis to believe Carter Page had never been a CIA source. CIA told us so.
Unbelievable. Unbelievable. Okay, now, Robert, I'm going to give you a rest give me 5 minutes, everybody, because I have been missing a ton of super chats, and I don't want to be discourteous to the super chatters. I can't bring them up anymore, but I'm going to read the names. Vicky Rose, and we may not be able to answer the super chats, but we're going to do this and then break into. We have two more subjects. We got the high capacity magazines, and we got to do the Milley story proper. Now that we've had the massive backdrop of all of this. Vicky Rose, understanding subpoenas are invasive, e.g. electronic communications. How do prosecutors account for invasion of privacy for not only defendants, but for other people within evidence collected? Do any rules or regulations apply? I mean, I guess the idea is if there's anything that concerns third parties, it can be filed under seal. It can be redacted if necessary. But
it's why wiretaps are very hard to obtain. So to give you FISA is just an absurd exception, and it's meant for high-end terrorism emergency risk cases. That's why they're 90 days. The idea is that you only go to the FISA court when we've got an imminent plot. We need to know exactly what's going to happen. It may happen within days. We need this authority. And that's why they're a rubber stamp, effectively, because they always think that's what's really happening. Now, their eyes should have percolated up when anybody connected to Trump was being investigated. But the FISA court, Roberts puts people on there who are deferential to the executive branch, so they never second guess them, never question them. And I don't blame that just on Roberts. Every Supreme Court justice has done that. Chief Justice has done that. And occasionally you'll get a FISA court judge who will get upset and issue one of those. And every 4 or 5 years, you'll get a FISA court order that says, I can't believe that you guys have been lying to me for years. It'll just be one of these.
Yeah, that's another one of the cover your ass judgments. Like, you've been lying to me. How dare you? You make me look
exactly
nuts.
And remember, originally they orchestrated General Flynn's plea to be in front of a judge who'd sat on the FISA court who was personal friends with the corrupt special agent. I mean, it keeps going on and on.
I brought that super chat. Someone says, yeah, the worst is Rudy Contreras, who was texting Stroke or joking about his relationship with Stroke, who was the original judge on that file.
So, but going to that question, if let's say you want a wiretap, the IRS, for example, no wiretap authority, because even Congress knew those dimwits don't need any that kind of investigative inquiry. So now they have the ability to go through your tax records, which is a confession of all kinds of things. Which reminds me of a good book called The Confessions of an Economic Hitman. If you want to understand the interrelationship between non-governmental organizations and deep state apparatus, it's a very good book called The Confessions of an Economic Hitman. But in order to get only certain agencies can get a wiretap. Judges are generally skeptical of wiretaps, and usually you have to say on the wiretap that if the conversation, you can only listen for a little bit. The conversation isn't continually about the subject of the wiretap. You have to opt off.
Yeah.
You can't keep recording.
Good luck.
That's not true in FISA. So in FISA, they gather the NSA is gathering. In case people don't know, this is why Trump was threatening Snowden. It's not a coincidence he started talking about Snowden right now. He's agitated about the lack of action by Durham in part, and he's wanting to deter deep state actors from trying to undermine, doing an October surprise like what they did to Carter with Iranian hostages, and take him out in the general election. So he's playing a cat and mouse game, and he's playing a little bit of a what's that game where you have two cars going at each other and who's going to chicken. He's playing a little bit of a game of chicken with him. That's why because Snowden is the guy who outed all of this in terms of the corrupt surveillance, how broad it was, how wide it was, how it involves outside groups, how it's not being limited. All the abuses they used against Trump were originally documented by Snowden. So a FISA warrant can look at everything. By contrast, when you get a wiretap, or let's say you get a search warrant, or you get a subpoena for certain records, those records have to be limited. You have to request it be by category, by time frame. You can't look at certain records. If you illicitly look, I've brought this up in multiple cases. Whenever they look at records they shouldn't, I go after the agents. I go after the prosecutors. I go after the whole case because they gathered intel they were not entitled to. That was an invasion of privacy. That can be a Bivens action against the federal government, a 1983 action if the state government does it. So there are limitations to protect privacy outside of the FISA context. FISA is the one place where there really is no protection for privacy. And the protection is supposed to be the super high probable cause for these very rare cases of very rare instances of someone involved in foreign spying on behalf directly of a foreign government. Carter Page, that was all absurd. Patently, I mean, the FBI was so bad, the FBI did something it had never done, which was formally withdraw those from the file and say they never should have been filed and were never had any factual evidentiary basis.
Too little, too late. It's what's mind-boggling is that I'm still going to have an argument with people who think that there was nothing fishy about the FBI investigation to Trump.
People used to. I remember having a debate with someone during while I was representing Wesley Snipes, challenging the city of New York trying to do a forcible DNA extraction while rummaging through his personal information. And she's like, "Well, if he's not the father, he'll be happy to take that test." And it was a general privacy argument. And I said, "That's fine. You know, I think you might be up to something bad in your bedroom. You don't mind if we videotape it, right?" They just in case. I mean, you know, it's like everybody has some limits to where they recognize certain privacy should be protected. And if people have no problem whatsoever with this kind of FISA investigation, then just open up their home to 24/7 internal taping, tape record every conversation, tape record every activity. There's very few Americans who are willing to actually do that. It's mostly political bias that explains their reasoning in these cases.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm sure there are apps for that, which I'm sure is coming in. Okay. John Christopher says, so Viva still want to become a U.S. citizen? I'm happy being Canadian. I say everybody loves their home, even if they love it for their foibles or for their problems. Canada has some issues. It's still my country and my home country, and I love it.